It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
The world will no longer remember what we say, but it can never forget what they did.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Hello and welcome to Eccentric Earth, the podcast where I, your host Amy Walker, delve into stories from across history with a guest who has no idea what the topic's going to be. And joining me this week is Han Burch.
Hello.
Hi, thank you for coming back to the show again.
Always.
Yeah, our first guest since our 1 year anniversary. That was crazy times.
I was actually going to mention before we started recording, and it totally slipped my mind, that I know it didn't make it into the finished edit of the podcast, but I did want to thank you for when I mentioned that I touched a dead body. Your immediate response wasn't "I should be calling the cops," but it was "I better turn the recording off so you don't incriminate yourself." And I just feel like that's a true friend.
Yeah, it wasn't like, "Oh no, I'm in danger." It's shit, I can't get Han arrested.
Yeah, true friendship. I appreciate that.
I'm a true friend. I would have taken your murderous secret to my grave. She didn't kill anyone, listeners. Don't worry.
That you know of.
Oh, and now the fear's back.
says the person who's been sending me pictures of knives again today.
Don't know what you're talking about. Well, I'm going to apologise to you and the listeners in advance because I found this amazing person and I got very excited reading about them. I was like, this story's great. It's really cool. I got to tell it. And it wasn't until I was about halfway through the research, I was like, there is an awful lot of Russian names and places in this. So, I am sorry for any mispronunciation that is guaranteed to occur, because I'm not going to get through this whole thing correctly. So, yeah, brace yourselves. It's worth it.
It was the worst thing about reading Crime and Punishment to me was just all the names. Like, all the names are impronounceable and everyone has 17 of them. Yeah,
I love Battle Royale, and whenever I watch the film, it's easy to keep track. For some reason, I can keep track of who's who. When I'm reading the book, I just struggle. I think because it's written down, I'm trying to pronounce it correctly in my head, rather than just hearing people say, this is so-and-so. It's like, okay, now I'm getting a bit foggy, who's that? And I'm kind of having to sort of skip back a bit. And to do that in a book the size of War and Peace, oh.
I'll have to borrow that when you're done. I didn't realise it was a book too.
Anyway, we should start this story.
Yeah, we probably should.
This podcast is part of Britpod Scene, an independent network of uniquely British podcasts that's always growing. Check out BritpodScene.com or BritpodScene on Twitter to find out more.
It's unknown when or where Sidney George Reilly was born, as there are several conflicting accounts of his origin. However, it is believed he was born around 1874. He himself told several versions of his origin throughout his life. One said that he was born Georgi Rosenblum, born in Pietrokow to a wealthy contractor and landowner. He also claimed to be the son of an Irish merchant seaman, an Irish clergyman, and an aristocratic landowner connected to the court of Emperor Alex III of Russia. According to a Soviet secret police dossier compiled in 1925, he was possibly born Zygmunt Markovich Rosenblum in Odessa.
So even the secret police don't know who he is.
Yeah.
I know it's like it was much easier back then, but that's still pretty...
Yeah, and this made the start of this, like compiling this together, very difficult because I didn't know which ones to go with. I found a few sort of respected historians and writers who seem to kind of share one origin, so it will kind of follow that. And that one is him being born Georgi Rosenblum. Yeah, so in that last one, one of the secret police, they said his father was called Marcus, and he was a doctor and shipping agent, while his mother came from an impoverished noble family. Other sources claim that he was born Georgi Rosenblum in Odessa in 1873. In one account, his birth name is given as Salomon Rosenblum, and yet another source states that he was born Sigmund Georgievich Rosenblum, who was supposed to be the only son of Pauline and Gregory Rosenblum, a wealthy Polish Jewish family. So
he was born place at a time to people.
So, according to his official biographer, Richard B. Spence, details of his education are uncertain.
Well, it's just like, if you don't know what his name is or when he was born or where he was born,
Yeah.
It's pretty likely that you're not going to know where he went to school either.
Yeah. He said, despite later claims he did not attend Heidelberg or Cambridge universities or the Royal School of Mines. Nevertheless, he demonstrated sufficient knowledge of chemistry to gain membership in the Chemical Society in 1896 and the Institute of Chemistry in 1897. He had an exceptional command of languages, including English, Russian, Polish, German, and French. So, don't know where he learnt stuff, but he's good at what he knows.
Yeah, he obviously learnt some stuff somewhere and is quite a smart.
Yeah. So, Giles Milton, who has researched his early life, said both his parents were Jewish, although they had converted to Catholicism. Rosenblum fled Odessa in his late teens for reasons that remain obscure. No surprise. No less obscure are the next 2 decades of his life. He would later spin tales about how he had been a cook, a dock worker, a railway engineer in India, and a brothel doorman in Brazil, but there is no certainty that he did any of these jobs.
I feel like is he like what Pierce Hawthorne did when his dad sent him off to sail around the world and he just went offshore and partied and then made up all these stories?
Well, that's the thing. There's so much of this guy's life, as you will see throughout this story, there's so much of this guy's life where the stuff that we can prove is batshit crazy, so the stuff that might not be true is no less crazy.
Okay. Now, okay.
So, according to reports of the Tsarist political police, the Okhrana, Rosenblum was arrested in 1892 for political activities and for being a courier for revolutionary groups known as the Friends of Enlightenment, though he managed to escape punishment. After his release, his father told him that his mother was dead and his biological father was actually her Jewish doctor. Apparently, Apparently distraught by this news, he faked his death in Odessa harbour and stowed away aboard a British ship bound for South America. Arriving in Brazil, he adopted the name Pedro and worked as a dock worker,
come on!
a road mender, a plantation labourer, and a cook for the British intelligence expedition in 1895. Yeah, you seem to already be not believing half of what's going on.
No. I'm like, could you have picked a more cliched name? That was my reaction.
Well, I don't know. Is it like, would someone from another country coming over here who wants to adopt an English name, would they just go for John? Because it's very English, but it's also, there's loads of Johns running around, so it'd work.
I don't know. I expected somebody with obviously a penchant for lying to be slightly more creative. That's all. I expected more of Giorgio, Solomon, Rosenblum, Pieter, John, Pedro.
Yeah. I also mentioned the name Sidney earlier, which hasn't come up yet, but that's what he's known as quite a bit. So there's even more names to come. So he allegedly saved both the expedition, the British intelligence expedition I mentioned earlier, and the life of Major Charles Fothergill when hostile natives attacked them. Rosenblum seized the British officer's pistol and killed the attackers. Fothergill rewarded his bravery with £1,500, a British passport, and passage to Britain, where Pedro became Sidney Rosenblum.
So you're saying he alleged this, so there's no evidence?
Yes. The record of evidence contradicts this tale.
Okay. Because, I haven't... There were a few, red flags raised during that telling.
A few. This is like a red flag parade.
It's true.
Evidence indicates that Rosenblum arrived in London from France, not Brazil, in December 1895, prompted by his unscrupulous acquisition of a large sum of money and a hasty departure from Paris. According to this account, Rosenblum and his Polish accomplice waylaid 2 Italian anarchists on Christmas Day and robbed them of a substantial amount of revolutionary funds. One anarchist's throat was cut while the other died from knife wounds 3 days later.
Oh, crikey.
Yeah, and this is actually documented because a French newspaper reported on it on the 27th of December and said, a dramatic event occurred on a train. On opening the door of one of the coaches, the railway staff discovered an unfortunate passenger lying unconscious in the middle of a pool of blood. His throat had been cut and his body bore the marks of numerous knife wounds. Terrified at the sight, the station staff hastened to inform the special investigator, who started preliminary inquiries and sent the wounded man to hospital. Whether or not that was him, no one knows because this guy's like the fucking wind, but that event did happen. Police learned that the physical description of one of the assailants matched Rosenblum's, but he was already en route to Britain. His accomplice later told British intelligence officers about this incident and other dealings with Rosenblum. Apparently, several months prior to this murder, Rosenblum had met Ethel Bull, a young Englishwoman who was a budding writer. The couple began a sexual relationship and he told her about his past in Russia. After the affair concluded, they continued to correspond. And in 1897, Bull published The Gadfly, a critically acclaimed novel whose central character was allegedly based on Rosenblum's life. In the novel, the protagonist is a bastard who feigns his suicide to escape his illegitimate past, then voyages to South America. He later returns to Europe and becomes involved with Italian anarchists and other revolutionaries.
Sounds remarkably similar.
Yeah, I think it's easy to see how that connects.
I mean, if he is lying, he could have sued her for copyright infringement. I made up that story, you didn't.
He arrived in England in early 1896 and began living at the Albert Mansions, an apartment block in Waterloo. He created the Ozone's Preparation Company, which peddled patent medicines, and he became an informant for William Melville, the superintendent of Scotland Yard's special branch.
Doesn't surprise me that he peddled patent medicines.
Yeah, this guy does seem like the bit of a con man. In 1897, Rosenblum began an affair with Margaret Thomas, the youthful wife of Reverend Hugh Thomas, shortly before her husband's death. Rosenblum met Thomas in London through his Ozone Preparations Company, and Thomas introduced Rosenblum to his wife at his manor house, and they began having an affair. On the 4th of March 1898, Thomas altered his will and appointed Margaret as the executor. He was found dead in his room on the 12th of March, just a week after the new will was made. A mysterious Dr. T.W. Andrew, whose physical description matched that of Rosenblum, appeared to certify Thomas's death as generic influenza and proclaimed that there was no need for an inquest. Records indicate that there was no one by the name of Dr. T.W. Andrew in Great Britain at the time.
God, I mean, you think about the temptation is. Sorry, I'm going to sneeze. Sorry.
Bless you.
Thank you. The temptation is to call this dude incredibly clever, but he wouldn't last a minute in this day and age.
Oh God, no. I think to get away with this stuff nowadays, you've got to be so much better than they used to be back in the old days.
So much cleverer. Yes, there was a weird doctor who was wearing a blatantly fake moustache.
Margaret insisted that her husband's body be ready for burial within 36 hours. She inherited roughly £800,000.
Nice.
Yeah, not bad for a murder, I suppose. The Metropolitan Police did not investigate Dr. T.W. Andrew, nor did they investigate the nurse who Margaret had hired, who had previously been linked to an arsenic poisoning of a former employer. Oh, it's so obvious.
Yeah.
I just had to, when I researched that bit, I had to pause as well, because it's just like, oh my God, how? 4 months later, on the 22nd of August, 1898, Rosenblum and Margaret married. The marriage not only brought the wealth which Rosenblum desired, but provided a pretext to discard his identity of Sigmund Rosenblum. With Melville's assistance, he crafted a new identity, Sidney George Reilly.
Hey, what? The Chief of Police of Scotland Yard?
Yeah, he's helped him forge a new identity.
Enabled him to enter witness protection.
I'm not sure if it's so much witness protection, but kind of, well, yeah.
He was a criminal.
He's like, here's your new identity, because...
Why do you need a new... But
Well, he's got to keep his
You'd think
informants
the copper
happy.
would be like, why do you need a new identity? Have you committed a crime or anything? No, I just fancied a change.
Just because he's asked for a new identity after he married this rich widow whose husband died mysteriously
died.
and it was all deemed okay by a doctor who looks exactly like him, doesn't mean he needs a new
It doesn't
identity for
exist.
any dodgy reasons.
No. I mean, who are we to say? We're not police officers.
I don't think Melville was either.
We're obviously, it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. We think that we're cleverer, but he's a policeman and we should just realise that he was obviously right.
In June 1899, Sidney and Margaret travelled to the Russian Empire using Sidney's forged British passport, a travel document and cover identity both purportedly created by William Melville. Whilst in St. Petersburg, he was approached by Japanese General Akashi Motojiro to work for the Japanese Secret Intelligence Service. Motojiro...
Was he though?
No, some of these things, there are documents. Okay. Motojiro believed the most reliable spies were those who were motivated by profit instead of feelings of sympathy towards Japan, and he believed Sidney to be such a person.
I think he was probably not wrong in that.
Yeah.
But then the issue with profit-motivated people is you can always be priced out of the market by your competitors.
Yep.
And if Sidney is the type of person to spy on Japan for money, I think he's also the type of person to go straight back to Britain and go, Japan are paying me to spy on them. If you pay me more, I'll give them false information.
Oh, I don't know. I don't see that happening at all in this story.
Oh, sorry. Have I just besmirched his honour?
No, I don't think he's earned any honour yet so far. As tensions between Russia and Japan were escalating towards war, Motojiro had at his disposal a budget of 1 million yen to obtain information on Russian troops and naval deployments. Motojiro instructed Sidney to offer financial aid to Russian revolutionaries in exchange for information about the Russian intelligence service and to determine the strength of Russian armed forces. Accepting the offer, Sidney became an agent for both the British War Office and the Japanese Empire. Sidney allegedly reconnoitred the Caucasus for its oil deposits and compiled a resource prospectus, which he reported to the British government. Shortly before the Russo-Japanese War, Sidney appeared in Port Arthur in Manchuria in the guise of a timber company owner. He remained there for 4 years, familiarising himself with political conditions in the Far East and obtaining a degree of personal influence in the ongoing espionage activities in the region. At the time, he was still a double agent for the British and Japanese governments. By purchasing and reselling enormous amounts of foodstuffs, raw materials, medicine and coal, Sidney made a small fortune as a war profiteer.
Oh, so he wasn't sort of so he wasn't gaining influence in order to then sell that information.
Oh no, he's
is he
doing
just
that a
selling
little
it
bit,
to-
but he's also lining his own pockets. He's working the
He's
system.
he's just doing bad things on all fronts, basically.
Oh god, yes.
Yeah.
Sidney cares about one person. Sidney.
Do you think that's what he calls himself in the mirror?
He could call himself God knows anything at this point. He's got so many names.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't even know which his real one is. In January 1904, he and a Chinese engineer acquaintance, Ho Liang Shung, allegedly stole the Port Arthur harbour defence plans for the Japanese Navy. Guided by these stolen plans, the Japanese Navy navigated by night through the Russian minefield protecting the harbour and launched a surprise attack on Port Arthur.
Quite a big bit of intelligence.
Yeah, he might be a shit, but he's pretty good at his job.
Mm.
Well, kind of, because Sidney quickly became a target of suspicion by Russian authorities at Port Arthur. He discovered that one of his business subordinates was an agent of Russian counter-espionage and chose to leave the region.
I'm just gonna go to the loo and I'm gonna take my suitcase.
He travelled to Imperial Japan, where he was handsomely paid by the Japanese government for his intelligence services.
I should hope so.
In February 1905, he appeared in Paris. He was described as having become a self-confident international adventurer who was fluent in several languages and whose intelligence services were highly desired by various great powers. During his stay in Paris, he renewed his friendship with William Melville, who had resigned...
I was just going to say that it's quite surprising that you managed to find his dating profile headline.
Wow, people like to talk about him. He was a suave and well-sought man.
Apparently so.
Highly desired. So yes, he renewed his friendship with Melville, who had resigned as superintendent of Scotland Yard's special branch and had become chief of a new intelligence section in the War Office. Working under commercial cover from an unassuming flat in London, Melville now ran both the counterintelligence and foreign intelligence operations.
Oh, what? Sorry. It took my brain a bit of time to go.
Yeah, Dodgy Melville is now basically running Britain's spies.
Yeah, and trying to find out foreign spies.
Yep. So a year earlier, in 1904, the Board of the Admiralty projected that petroleum would supplant coal as the primary source of fuel for the Royal Navy. During their investigation, the British Admiralty learned that an Australian mining engineer, William Knox Darcy, had obtained valuable oil rights in southern Persia. The Admiralty initiated efforts to entice Darcy to sell his newly acquired oil rights to the British government rather than to the French Rothschilds. Rielly, at the British Admiralty's request, located Darcy at Cannes in south of France and approached him in disguise. I love his disguise. Dressed as a Catholic priest, Sidney gate-crashed the private discussion on board the Rothschilds' yacht on the pretext of collecting donations for a religious charity. See, if you put this in a movie, they'd tell you it's too ridiculous.
Well, I was going to ask before you started, why did he disguise himself? Nobody knows, like, the person who he's wanting to con doesn't know what he looks like. But, oh no, it's not just a disguise, it's a plan and a disguise.
Yeah, it's his way in. Sidney then secretly informed Darcy that the British could give him a better financial deal. Darcy promptly terminated negotiations with the Rothschild and returned to London to meet with the British Admiralty.
So hang on a minute. Right, I'm so picturing this. Like, you know, those con man TV shows where he's got the dog collar on and he's like, no, my son, I must go through this door, and just like, you know, completely hustling his way through to like the chamber, and then getting there and then just like taking his collar off and throwing it down and going, Darcy, I'm from England. We can offer you a better deal. Come with me now. And then they both just run away. Is that how it went down?
Nothing in record says it didn't go down exactly like that.
Okay, that's good enough for me.
In 1909, Sidney attended the first Frankfurt International Air Show to attain a newly developed German magneto.
What?
You're questioning that he's been sent, or...?
No, I didn't know that Magneto was German. He doesn't have an accent in the movies.
Oh, I should have seen that one coming.
You really should have. I'm surprised
Especially as when I first read it, I went, Magneto? He does come from Germany.
He does actually, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's a German Jew.
Well, I wonder if that's where it comes from then. What is a magneto?
A magneto is an electrical generator that uses permanent magnets to produce periodic pulses of alternating current.
Okay, and what's the purpose of such a thing?
To produce electricity and power. It's kind of like a dynamo.
Oh, okay. But it's not powerful enough to actually do anything useful. I'm
going to be honest, I didn't really research into magnetos before this.
Well, I'm assuming it's not. Otherwise, why would we be digging up dinosaurs to run our power station, to run our power stations if we could just use magnets?
It might have been one of those things they started exploring it at the start of the century as this could be a way forward, and then it didn't pan out. It kind of works, but not on the levels that we need, maybe. So on the 5th day of the air show, a German plane lost control and crashed, killing the pilot. The plane's engine was alleged to have used a new type of magneto that was far ahead of other designs. Sidney and a British Secret Intelligence Service agent, posing as one of the exhibition's pilots, diverted the attention of spectators whilst they removed the magneto from the wreck and substituted another. The Secret Intelligence Service agent quickly made detailed drawings of the German magneto, and when the airplane had been removed to a hangar, the agent and Sidney managed to restore the original.
What?
Basically, they needed to look at this bit in the engine, so when this plane crashed, which they may or may not have caused, I couldn't see if that was the case.
Well, that's where I was saying, what about? I understood, we need to look at this engine, but, if you didn't cause the crash, how else were you going to look at an engine?
Yeah. So yeah, it sounds like they killed this guy just to get a look at the engine.
Yeah.
And then I like the way the other guy was like, I'm just going to dress as a pilot and go, hey, look at me, while Sidney just nabs it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, sterling plans.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not as James Bond as you think, is it? No one's like taking over the intelligence service from within or using special gadgets. They're literally putting on a fake priest outfit and going, hey, look over there.
Yeah. Yeah, they're basically just cutting the brake lines on an aeroplane.
In 1909, when the German Kaiser was expanding the war machine in Imperial Germany, British intelligence sent Sidney to obtain the plans for the weapons. Sidney arrived in Essen, disguised as a Baltic shipyard worker by the name of Karl Hahn. Having prepared his cover identity by learning to weld at Sheffield engineering firm, he obtained a low-level position as a welder at Krupp Gun Work Plant.
At least he actually put a bit of a effort into his cover this time.
Yeah. I like the fact that he actually went and learned to weld. It's like he couldn't fake it this time.
Well, yeah, I think even he realised that perhaps, if he's going to take a job as a welder, he needs to know how to weld.
Yeah. He joined the plant's fire brigade and persuaded its foreman that a set of plant schematics were needed to indicate the positions of fire extinguishers and hydrants. These schematics were soon logged into the fireman's office for members of the fire brigade to consult, and Sidney set about using them to locate the weapon plans.
That's quite clever.
Yeah, it's sneaky. I like it. In the early morning hours, Sidney picked the lock to the office where the plans were kept and was discovered by the foreman, who he strangled before completing the theft.
Oh.
Yeah, Sidney don't fuck around.
No.
He took a train to a safe house in Dortmund and tore the plans into 4 pieces, which he mailed separately so that if one were lost, the other 3 would still reveal the existence of the weapons. Yeah, so he stole weapon plans.
Yeah. And is that, again, I'm assuming that we have evidence for this?
Yes. Yeah, most of these things now, there is evidence.
Wow.
There's some claims that are like up in the air, like, but most of these, there's some sort of record because he's actually doing it for the British government now.
For the government, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much from what I saw, all the stuff where he's doing it for the British government, proven. The other stuff is a bit, probably, but maybe a little bit not. In April 1912, Sidney returned to St. Petersburg. The simple Russian one I fucked up on.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So he returned to St. Petersburg, where he assumed the role of a wealthy businessman and helped form the Wings Aviation Club. During his time there, he was described as having a lavish apartment in St. Petersburg, a splendid art collection, and was a member of the most exclusive club in the city. He assumed a friendship with Alexander Grammatikov, who was an Okhrana agent. Do you know who the Okhrana are?
No.
Russian secret police, basically like a precursor to KGB and stuff like that.
Okay.
He made friends with him because he was a fellow member of the aviation club.
And that's the only reason?
Well, I'm sure they were able to make friends other ways, but that was his in.
Oh, no, sorry. It's all right. I thought that you were, saying, yeah, no, he just became friends with him for no ulterior motives.
Oh, no, there's definitely ulterior motives.
Yeah.
Sidney was tasked with befriending and profiling Sir Basil Zakharov, the international arms salesman and representative of Vickers Armstrong Munitions. During this assignment, Sidney learned Le System from Zakharov, the strategy of playing all sides against each other to maximise financial profit. Which, let's be honest, he was kind of doing it before, working 2 spy groups at the same time, but...
Yeah, and now he's international arms dealers.
Yeah.
Right.
Sidney also became known as something of a womanizer during this period, wherever in the world he was. Author Giles Milton said that all accounts agree that he had a seductive charm, loving women as he loved himself. A string of mistresses would fall under his spell. Monogamy did not come naturally to Reilly, and although he was usually fastidious in his choice of women, it did not prevent him from cavorting around London on one of his visits with a common tart named Plugger. Oh, common tart named Plugger. Brilliant. Between 1915 and 1918, Sidney, while engaged in the munitions business in New York, was covertly employed by British intelligence, and it is believed by some biographers that he may have participated in several acts of so-called German sabotage deliberately calculated to provoke the United States to enter the war against the Central Powers.
Interesting.
Yeah, bit conspiracy theory-ish. but interesting. During this time, he engaged in arranging munition sales to the Imperial German Army and its enemy, the Imperial Russian Army. However, when the United States entered the war in April 1917, Sidney's business became less profitable since his company was now prohibited from selling ammunition to the Germans.
Well, that sort of, does that not put pay to the theory that he was trying to get America into the war? Because he must have known that would have affected his profit margin.
Yeah, I suppose, unless he was just expecting to be able to keep selling to both sides. But no, I think he'd be probably smarter than that, yeah.
Yeah.
Faced with the unexpected financial hardship, he sought to resume his paid intelligence work for the British government whilst in New York. He approached Norman Thwaites, the MI1 head of station in New York. I looked at this because I'd not heard of MI1 before. It sounds, from what I saw, it's what would eventually become MI6.
Yeah, I think they started with different numbers for different countries, and then they just went to like Britain and overseas. So they just kept 5 and 6.
Yeah, because I'd not heard of MI1 before. It was a bit taken aback by that when I saw that pop up. Thwaites, who was formerly a private secretary to newspaper magnate Joseph Pulitzer and a police reporter for Pulitzer's News of the World, Thwaites was keen on obtaining information concerning radical activities in the United States. I'm not sure if you remember, that's the same editor and newspaper that Nellie Bly worked for.
Yes, I did remember.
Yeah, which I wasn't aware of that connection before I started this, but I like it when our stories intermingle.
That's what you call a callback.
Yeah. And if people don't know what we're talking about, go listen to that episode. Under Thwaites' direction, Sidney worked alongside other British intelligence operatives. Although their mission was to coordinate with the US government in regards to intelligence about the German Empire and Soviet Russia, the British agents also focused upon obtaining trade secrets and other commercial information related to American industrial companies for their British rivals. So even when your allies in war, we're going to think about money.
Of course.
Thwaites was so impressed with Sidney's work that he wrote a letter of recommendation to Mansfield Cumming, the head of MI1. It was also Thwaites who recommended that Sidney visit Toronto to obtain a military commission, because you couldn't join MI1 if you weren't military.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So on the 19th of October in 1917, Sidney joined the Royal Canadian Flying Corps. After receiving a commission to lieutenant, he voyaged to London, where Cumming formally swore Lieutenant Rielly into service as a staff caseholder in His Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service. So now he's officially on the books. He is a member of MI1. In January 1918, Robert Bruce Lockhart, a junior member of the British Foreign Office, was personally handpicked by British Prime Minister David Lloyd George to undertake a sensitive diplomatic mission to Soviet Russia. Lockhart's assigned objectives were to liaise with Soviet authorities, to subvert Soviet-German relations, and to bolster Soviet resistance to German peace overtures, and to push Soviet authorities into recreating the Eastern Theatre. By April, however, Lockhart had hopelessly failed to achieve any of his objectives. Concurrently, he ordered Sidney Reilly to pursue contacts with anti-Bolshevik circles in order to sow the seeds for an armed uprising in Moscow.
I was going to say, it's not really, not exactly a very difficult, it's not exactly a very easy thing to accomplish.
Vague aims where this is what we want at the end, but not going to help you go about it.
Well, no, also, but wasn't one of them restarting the war on the Eastern Front?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's I've got to ingratiate myself to the highest levels of military power in Russia and then persuade them that my idea is better. A fairly difficult task.
I just don't think you're trying hard enough, Em.
Well, I'm not trying at all, to be fair.
Well, there's your problem.
Yeah, probably.
In May 1918, Lockhart, Sidney and various agents of the Allied powers repeatedly met with Boris Savinkov, head of the Counter-Revolutionary Union for the Defence of the Motherland and Freedom, the UDMF. Savinkov had been Deputy War Minister in the Provisional Government and a key opponent of the Bolsheviks. A former Socialist Revolutionary Party member, he had formed the UDMF consisting of several thousand Russian fighters, and he was receptive to Allied overtures to depose the Soviet government. Lockhart, Sidney and others then contacted anti-Bolshevik groups linked to Savinkov and Socialist Revolutionary Party cells. They supported these factions with MI1 funds. They also liaised with consul generals of the United States and France, and coordinated their activities with intelligence operatives affiliated with the French and US consuls in Moscow.
Well, it's nice to know that, that Western powers interventionist, like sly, secret interventionist tactics started so long ago.
Yeah, people are just always out to fuck each other over. In June, disillusioned elements of Colonel Berzin's Latvian Rifle Division began appearing in anti-Bolshevik circles in Petrograd and were eventually directed to a British naval attaché, Captain Francis Cromie, and his assistant, Mr. Constantine, a Turkish merchant who was actually Sidney in disguise. Because he loves a good disguise.
Love a good disguise.
In contrast to his previous espionage operations, which had been independent of other agents, Sidney worked closely while in Petrograd with Cromie in joint efforts to recruit Berzin's Latvians and to equip anti-Bolshevik armed forces. At the time, Cromie purportedly represented the British Naval Intelligence Division and oversaw its operations in northern Russia. Cromie operated in loose coordination with the ineffectual Commander Ernest Boyce, the MI1 station chief in Petrograd. As Berzin's Latvians were deemed the Praetorian Guard of the Bolsheviks and entrusted with the security of both Lenin and the Kremlin, the Allied plotters believed that their participation in the pending coup would be vital.
Yeah, they're not wrong.
Well, yeah, if you guard Lenin, it's like, yeah, you're pretty key.
Yeah, it's basically like, if we get these people on our side, we're pretty much that.
Yeah.
If we don't, it'll be quite hard. That's the funny thing about, those outright people that actually do want an armed uprising. They are fully of the impression that if they got an uprising, that 100,000 people in the military and the police would join them.
Okay. Can't see that happening.
Yeah. Well, 100,000 people is only 0.3 of the American population. So
that's all you need, I think. It's not a big country to take over.
No. And of course all the military are on your side and will be prepared to overthrow the government. Seems totally legit.
With the aid of the Latvian riflemen, the Allied agents hoped to seize both Lenin and Trotsky. Sidney arranged a meeting between Lockhart and the Latvians at the British mission in Moscow. He reportedly expended over 1 million rubles to bribe the Red Army troops guarding the Kremlin. At this stage, Cromie, Sidney, Lockhart and other Allied agents allegedly planned a full-scale coup against the Bolshevik government and drew up a list of Soviet military leaders ready to assume responsibilities on its demise. Their objective was to capture or kill Lenin and Trotsky, to establish a provisional government, and to extinguish Bolshevism. Oh, I can't even say it. Bolshevism. There we go.
It was the fact that you mispronounced it the same way both times.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You knew what I was saying.
I know. Trust me, there's many more times that I could pick you up on your pronunciation, but I don't.
Yeah, I'm trying my best.
I know. That's why I don't. Because once or twice is cool. Medical terms is cool, but if I do it more than that, it just seems like bullying.
Yeah. As long as I mispronounce the names the same way every time, you can follow who's who. As Lockhart's diplomatic status hindered his open engagement in clandestine... Yeah, I paused after that because I was like, did I say that wrong? Even in my head, I was like, that wasn't right.
I was planning on correcting you on the first word you got wrong. I just didn't realise it'd be right out the gate.
Let's start that one again. I'll leave that in though, because you seem to enjoy yourself there.
Oh, wow.
Look, you know the rules. The guests can look stupid. I try not to.
Yeah.
The power of being the one who edits.
Indeed.
Let's try that one again. As Lockhart's diplomatic status hindered his open engagement in clandestine activities, he chose to supervise activities from afar and delegate the actual direction of the coup to Sidney.
I mean, you hear people talk about the deep state and the shadow government, but then you hear that in 1920, 2 random dudes were basically responsible for planning the takeover of Russia, and they were drawing up the list of who was going to take over.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. I wonder if people knew that Sidney was originally born in Russia.
I think they did. He sounds like he was quite open about that he was from Russia because of inspiring that book before. So they probably picked him because of that, because he knows the country, he can probably speak the language very well, put on a very convincing accent if he hasn't already lost his original one. So I dare say it's part of why he was put on the mission.
But you'd think that there might be a sort of like, we should probably keep an eye on him just in case he's playing both sides.
From the sounds of him, you just need to make sure that you keep an eye on him so he doesn't go and meet some woman called Plugger. I think he's more likely to go off womanizing than go off mission. It's funny you were saying about trusting him, because the next part of this paragraph. Throughout their backroom intrigues in Moscow, Lockhart never openly questioned Sidney's loyalty to the Allies, although he privately wondered if he had made a secret bargain with Colonel Brezin and his Latvian riflemen to later seize power for themselves. So yeah, he is questioning whether he should keep an eye on him or not.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, you're reading ahead. Unknown to the Allied conspirators, however, Berzin was, quote, an honest commander and devoted to the Soviet government. He informed Felix... What?
Sorry. My cat just came in from the cold and put his cold feet on my tummy.
Oh, horrible.
Could you move your chilly feet, please? Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not good at pronunciations, but this next one, I've got no hope in hell. So Berzin informed Felix Dzerzhinsky. I think I'm going to send this to you in Skype. It's insane.
I'm not particularly great on.
There's like 2 Z's in there. Dzerzhinsky.
Dzerzhinsky, yeah.
Okay, we'll go with that one. So he informed the secret police, the Cheka, that he had been approached by the Allied agents in an attempt to recruit him into a possible coup. The Cheka had gained access to British diplomatic codes in months earlier and were closely monitoring the anti-Bolshevik activities, fully aware of the plot. Berzin and other Latvian officers were ordered to pretend to be receptive to the plotters and to meticulously report every detail of the pending operation. On the 4th of August, 1918, an Allied force landed at... a place in Russia. Arkhangelsk. Landed at Arkhangelsk, Russia.
Yeah, it's that place. It looks like Archangel.
Yeah, because it's Operation Archangel.
Yes. I don't know how it's pronounced. I just know that Thomas Harris wrote it, but it's the birthplace of somebody, I think. I can't remember.
Yeah, well, the expedition that landed there was actually named Operation Archangel. I just don't know how the Russian version of that is pronounced. So the objective of the operation was to prevent the German Empire from obtaining Allied military supplies stored in the region. In retaliation for this excursion, the Bolsheviks raided the British diplomatic mission on the 5th of August, disrupting a meeting Sidney had arranged between anti-Bolshevik Latvians, UDMF officials, and Lockhart. Unperturbed by these raids, Sidney conducted meetings on the 17th of August between Latvian regimental leaders and liaised with Captain George Alexander Hill, a multilingual British agent operating in Russia on behalf of the Ministry Intelligence Directorate. They arranged the coup would occur in the first week of September during a meeting of the Council of People's Commissars and the Moscow Soviet at the Bolshoi Theatre.
You got that one right.
I know, that's why I took my time. The Allied conspirators had organised a broad network of agents and saboteurs throughout Soviet Russia, whose overarching ambition was to disrupt the nation's food supplies. Coupled with the planned military uprising in Moscow, they believed a chronic food shortage would trigger popular unrest and further undermine Soviet authorities. Not a bad plan. On the 30th of August, a military cadet named Leonid Kanegisa was ordered to shoot and kill Uritsky, head of the Petrograd Cheka. Uritsky had been the second most powerful man in the city, and his murder was seen as a blow to both the Cheka and the entire Bolshevik leadership. Kanegisa tried to leave the city, but was apprehended by Red Guards after a violent shootout. On the same day, Fanya Kaplan shot and wounded Lenin as he departed the Michelson Arms factory in Moscow. As Lenin exited the building and before he entered his motorcar, Kaplan called out to him. When he turned towards her, she fired 3 shots at him with a pistol. One bullet narrowly missed his heart and penetrated his lung, while another bullet lodged in his neck near his jugular.
Bloody women.
Yeah, I know.
Might have been getting an assassination right.
The attack was widely covered in Russian press, generating a great deal of sympathy for Lenin and boosting his popularity.
Damn.
Yep. As a consequence of this
The
assassination...
definition is backfire.
Yeah. As a consequence of this assassination attempt, however, the meetings between Lenin and Trotsky, where the bribed soldiers would seize them on behalf of the Allies, was postponed. Because Kaplan was not actually part of the plot. She just decided to try and shoot Lenin at the wrong time.
Oh, shit. Oh, okay.
Yes. Yeah, she had nothing to do with it. So if she hadn't have tried to shoot him then, this could have gone very, very differently.
Yeah.
The murder of Uritsky and the failed assassination of Lenin were used by the Cheka to implicate any malcontents and foreigners in a grand conspiracy that warranted a full-scale campaign, named the Red Terror. Thousands of political opponents were seized and mass executions took place across the city.
I know I'm not trying to make light of this terrible event, but the fact that the Russians themselves called one of their actions the Red Terror, and yet the best the Americans could do was call it the Red Scare.
Yeah, they were operating on very different levels there.
Yeah.
Using lists supplied by undercover agents, the Cheka proceeded to clear out the, quote, nests of conspirators in foreign embassies, and in doing so they arrested key figures vital to the impending coup. On the 31st of August, a Cheka detachment raided the British consulate in Petrograd and killed Kromy. However, he put up armed resistance. According to press reports, he made a last stand on the first floor of the consulate, armed only with a revolver. He killed 3 soldiers before he was in turn killed and his corpse mutilated. The Cheka detachment then arrested over 40 people who had sought refuge in the British consulate, as well as seized weapon caches and compromising documents which they claimed implicated the staff in the forthcoming coup. Kromy's death was publicly depicted as a measure of self-defense by the Bolsheviks who had been forced to return his fire. Meanwhile, Lockhart was arrested by the Cheka and transported under guard to Lubyanka prison. When questioned about the coup, he and other British nationals dismissed the idea as nonsense. Afterwards, he was placed in the same holding cell as Franja Kaplan, whom their watchful jailers hoped might betray some sign of recognising him and other British agents. However, because she wasn't involved in it at all, she showed no signs of recognising him or anyone else. So when it became clear that she would not implicate any accomplices, she was executed in the Kremlin's Alexander Garden on the 3rd of September 1918 with a bullet to the back of the head. Her corpse was bundled into a rusted iron barrel and set alight.
Wow.
Lockhart was later released and deported, so he got off so lucky. Newspapers in Russia put credit for the coup on Sidney. He was hunted throughout days and nights as he had never been hunted before, according to one report, and his photograph with a full description and a reward was placarded throughout the area. The Cheka raided his assumed refuge, but Sidney avoided capture and met with Captain Hill whilst in hiding. Hill later wrote that Sidney, despite narrowly escaping his pursuers in both Moscow and Petrograd, was, quote, absolutely cool, calm and collected, not in the least downhearted, and only concerned in gathering together the broken threads and starting afresh.
Yeah, but is that because he's a badass, or is that because he's like, if I get arrested, I'll just turn on the Brits?
I'm sure he's got plans in the works to turn on anyone whenever he needs to.
Yeah. I'm like, this is a dude who excels at self-preservation.
Oh yeah. Hill proposed that Sidney leave Russia via the Ukraine using their network of British agents for safe houses and assistance. However, Sidney chose a shorter and more dangerous route north through Petrograd and the Baltic provinces to Finland in order to get their reports to London as early as possible. With the Cheka closing in, Sidney, carrying a Baltic German passport supplied by Hill, departed the region in a railway car reserved for the German embassy. He arrived unscathed in London on the 8th of November.
He's a lucky bastard.
He is. I don't think that was skill. I think that one was probably just luck. While safely in England, Sidney, Lockhart and other agents were tried in absentia before the Supreme Revolutionary Tribunal in Russia in a proceeding which began on the 25th of November. Approximately 20 defendants faced charges in the trial. The case was concluded on the 3rd of December 1918, with 2 defendants sentenced to be shot and various others sentenced to terms of prison or forced labour for terms up to 5 years. Both Sidney and Lockhart had been sentenced to death by the Revolutionary Tribunal for their roles in the attempted coup, and the sentence was to be carried out immediately should either of them be apprehended on Soviet soil.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a prediction. I'm going to predict that he's going to go back to Russia at some point, and I don't think he's going to die that way.
No?
That's my prediction.
Okay. Well, like you said, he is the master of self-preservation.
Well, yeah, that's my... I'm gambling on you, Sidney.
Within a week of their return debriefing, the British Secret Intelligence Service and the Foreign Office again sent Sidney and Hill to southern Russia under the cover of British trade delegates.
Oh, okay. I wasn't expecting like the British government to just go, yeah, no, it's fine, go back.
Yeah, it's like, and it's a week later. They didn't wait for it to cool down. It's like, you'll be fine.
I mean, Russia's like, I mean, it is a fairly big country, but still.
I know spreading information is not as good back then, and it's harder to keep track of things and identify people, but that's still a hell of a risk.
I mean, also, having said that, you know, we don't actually know how good Sidney's disguises were.
Yeah, he could have, like, had numerous stick-on mustaches and...
Indeed, you know?
Maybe he had more costumes than the priest as well. He could have been a rabbi.
School teacher.
Doctor. Yeah, get a stethoscope on you, you're a doctor. It's easy, that one. Clown. No one ever suspects the clown. Which they should, because the clowns are always up to something. I just got an image of him sneaking through the Russian border now as a clown.
But then, like, wanting to sneak through the Russian border as a clown, but forgetting that he packed the pair of shoes with the squeakers in them.
Yeah, he was squeaking in my mind. Traipsing through the snow.
God damn it! Have you heard of the, what's his name? The German comedian, Henning Venn?
Yes.
Have you ever watched him on Would I Lie to You?
No, I've not seen him on that.
He tells a story about getting captured by, I think it was Polish border guards, for accidentally wandering into Poland.
Oh, a German accidentally wandering into Poland. Mm-hmm. Sidney and Hill's assignment was to uncover information about the Black Sea coast needed for the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. They travelled in the guise of British merchants with appropriate credentials provided by the Department of Overseas Trade. Over the next 6 weeks or so, Sidney prepared 12 dispatches which reported on various aspects of the situation in South Russia and were delivered personally by Hill to the Foreign Office in London. Sidney identified 4 principal factors in the affairs of South Russia at the time: the volunteer army, the territorial or provincial governments in the Kuban, Don and Crimea. Sidney advised Allied assistance to organise South Russia for decisive action against Bolshevism. Urgent as the need for Allied military assistance to the volunteer army was in Sidney's estimation, he regarded economic assistance for South Russia as even more pressing. Manufactured goods were so scarce that he considered any moderate contribution from the Allies would have a most beneficial effect. 4 days before the British general election, on the 8th of October 1924, a Tory newspaper printed a letter purporting to originate from Grigory Zinoviev, head of the Third Communist International. The letter claimed the planned resumption of diplomatic and trade relations by the Labour Party with Soviet Russia would indirectly hasten or overthrow the British government. Hours later, the British Foreign Office incorporated this letter in a stiff note of protest to the Soviet government.
I say, old chap, you realise that one of your citizens is threatening to overthrow our government? I'm much vexed. Yours sincerely, British government.
Soviet Russia and British communists denounced the letter as a forgery by British intelligence agents, while conservative politicians and newspapers maintained the document was genuine.
Oh my god, this is so like the 1920s version of a Twitter fight right now.
Yep. Amid the uproar, Ramsay MacDonald's Labour government lost the 1924 general election. According to a 1926 article by Samuel Williamson of the New York Times, Sidney served as a courier to transport the forged letters into the United Kingdom. Some commentators have suggested that Sidney's role in, quotes, the famous Zinoviev's letter assumed a worldwide political importance, for its publication in the British press brought about the fall of the Ramsay MacDonald ministry, frustrated the realisation of the opposed Anglo-Russian commercial treaty, and as a final result led to the signing of treaties of Locarno, in virtue of which the other states of Europe presented, under the leadership of Britain, a united front against Soviet Russia. So if I've understood that right, basically they're saying this letter changed the course of relations between the whole of Europe and Russia.
Yeah, and am I right? Am I right in saying that it benefited Russia?
No, because there was going to be trade between Britain and Russia before, but if the Labour Party got in, according to the letter, so this kind of, if I'm understanding it correct, bolstered anti-Russian sentiment.
Oh, okay.
So it kind of separated Russia from Europe. And Sidney played some part in that, which isn't surprising. He's done everything else.
Mm-hmm.
According to Sidney's wife, he was determined to return to Russia to see if he could not find some of his friends who he believed to still be alive. He did this in 1925 and never came back.
Huh.
That's her quote. So in September 1925 in Paris, Sidney met with a number of British and Russian military and espionage personnel. This assembly discussed how they could make contact with a supposedly pro-monarchist and anti-Bolshevik organisation known as the Trust in Moscow. The assembly agreed that Sidney should journey to Finland to explore the feasibility of yet another uprising in Russia using the Trust apparatus. However, in actuality, the Trust was an elaborate counter-espionage deception created by the OGPU, the intelligence successor to the Cheka. Undercover agents of the OGPU lured Sidney into Bolshevik Russia to meet with the supposed anti-communist revolutionaries. At the Soviet-Finnish border, he was introduced to undercover OGPU agents posing as a senior Trust representative from Moscow. One of these undercover Soviet agents later recalled the meeting. The first impression of Sidney Reilly is unpleasant. His dark eyes express something biting and cruel. His lower lip drooped deeply and was too slick. The neat black hair, the demonstratively elegant suit, everything in his manner expressed something haughtily indifferent to his surroundings. Sidney was brought across the border by Teuvo Vaha, a former Finnish Red Guard fighter who now served the OGPU. Vaha took Reilly over the Sestra River to the Soviet side and handed him to OGPU officers.
Do you know what though? If you're Sidney, I wonder at which point he twigged that he was fucked.
Yeah, this is yeah, because there is one moment where it all comes crashing down for him, and it's got to be fucking terrifying.
Yeah, where, like, did he suspect the Finn, or was it at that moment when he turns and he realises what's happened and the person he trusted has betrayed him and this is the end of his life?
After Sidney crossed the Finnish border, the Soviets captured, transported and interrogated him at Lubyanka prison. On arrival, he was taken to the offices of Roman Pilar, a Soviet official who the previous year had arrested and ordered the execution of Boris Savinkov, a close friend of Sidney. Pilar reminded Sidney that he had been sentenced to death by the 1918 tribunal for his participation in counter-revolutionary plots. While Sidney was being interrogated, the Soviets publicly claimed that he had been shot trying to cross the Finnish border.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, so now he's assumed
They've
dead.
already put out the story that he's dead.
Yep. While facing daily interrogation, Sidney kept a diary in his cell of tiny handwritten notes on cigarette papers which he hid in the plasterwork of his cell wall. While his Soviet captors were interrogating him, he in turn was analysing and documenting their techniques. The diary was a detailed record of OGPU interrogation techniques, and he was confident that such unique documentation would, if he escaped, be of interest to the British SIS. Soviet guards eventually found this diary in his cell wall. Sidney was executed in a forest near Moscow on Thursday the 5th of November 1925. Eyewitness Boris Kudz claimed the execution was supervised by an OGPU officer while another fired the shot into Reilly's chest. Goods also confirmed that the order to kill him came directly from Joseph Stalin. After his death, there were various rumours about his survival. His wife claimed to possess evidence indicating that he was still alive as late as 1932, whilst others speculated that he had defected to the opposition and became an advisor to Soviet intelligence. Despite these rumours, newspapers called him the greatest spy in history and the Scarlet Pimpernel of Red Russia. Due to the nature of Sidney's life, there are numerous unconfirmed claims about his career in espionage. It has been claimed that during the Boer War, he masqueraded as a Russian arms merchant to spy on Dutch weapons shipments, that he seduced the wife of a Russian minister to glean information about German weapons shipments to Russia, and that he even attempted to overthrow the Russian Bolshevik government and to rescue the imprisoned Romanov family. Some historians feel much of his career is still considered classified and that we may never know everything about him, whilst others believe that many of the events we do know about have been heavily embellished. Sidney's friend, former diplomat and journalist Sir Robert Lockhart, was a close acquaintance of Ian Fleming, and for many years recounted Sidney's espionage adventures. It is believed that Sidney Reilly is one of the main inspirations for the fictional spy, James Bond.
Wow.
Like Fleming's fictional creation, Sidney was multilingual, fascinated by the Far East, fond of fine living, a compulsive gambler, and a hit with the ladies. Whether or not he did help to inspire the world's most famous spy, he is considered by many to be a dominating figure in the mythology of modern espionage. So yeah, there's Sidney Reilly for you.
I think he flipped.
You think he worked for the Russians?
Yeah.
I certainly believe that he would try.
His self-preservation was such that he was sent in to steal some plans, had 2 seconds to act when he was caught, and he killed the person.
Yeah.
He didn't have a weapon. He strangled them with his bare hands. That is somebody who has a self-preservation instinct.
Oh yeah, he'll do anything to stay alive.
Yeah. And why would the Soviets put the story out that he had been executed immediately when trying to cross into Russia? And then they obviously kept him around for at least a while because he kept that diary.
I believe that he, as soon as he got in that situation, was thinking of a way out, which would be, well, I'll join them. But I don't know if they'd have taken that deal or if they'd have just killed him. But I fully believe he'd have tried it. You know, this is Sidney. Of course he's going to betray everyone to try and stay alive.
But the fact that, so you've got he's captured. The Soviet Union put out a story saying that he's dead already when he's not. Time passes. He writes that diary. And then the story is that Stalin ordered his execution. Mm-hmm. Somebody's lying somewhere.
I don't know. I can't tell you. I wish I had an answer.
I think you should travel to Russia. Find people who were alive at the time, interview them and find out the truth. I mean, not that hard.
It's weird that we spoke about conspiracy theories before we started recording because
this
is a very conspiracy theory type ending of you can go by the official documents and like, okay, yeah, he's dead. But then it's also, or is he? Well, he probably is now, but did he survive Russia?
If he's not, he's like... He's holding on to more than one secret if he's still alive right now.
He's that strong at self-preservation, he's even cheated death.
He's currently in his 85th year of the longest Monopoly game on record with the Grim Reaper.
I just like to think that the Reaper turned up and he quickly slipped on his dog collar and went, "Look over there," and then ran away.
Yep. Seems legit.
But yeah, I really enjoyed this story, but it wasn't until I was halfway through that I thought, I'm never going to be able to pronounce any of this.
You did fine.
Because I was like, this is really good, but Russia? Oh no. they put letters together that the English would never do, and we have no idea how to pronounce it. But I just thought it was very interesting, because I'd never heard of this guy, or this secret plot to try and overthrow the Bolshevik government. No,
it was a new person and a lot of new facts about the world.
Yeah, and it just reinforces that peace times are really not peace times. Governments are always trying to screw each other over.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was talking about the Q Anonymous podcast that I listened to.
Yes.
They found an article in I can't remember the exact title, but it was something to do with Harvard Law. And it was a guy who was looking at United States intervention in South America. And so he basically looked up all the times covertly and non-covertly the US had intervened in 100 years. And it was 41 times, average of every 28 months. And then all of a sudden it stopped. And the guys who ran the podcast were like, yeah, well, it stopped at that point. But have you looked at interventionist rates in the Middle East since then? They didn't stop intervening. They just stopped intervening in South America. Yeah.
And most governments do that.
Well, whilst I don't, the whole notion of a deep state or a deep government smacks of paranoia to me. But never be fooled that your government is not doing horrific stuff every day of the week that you will never find out about.
Mm-hmm. They actually did a TV miniseries about Sidney Reilly.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a 1983 series that won a BAFTA in 1984, and Sidney was played by Sam Neill.
Wow. Have you seen it?
I have not. I'd like to try and track it down. Just popping a little picture on the Skype thing, like the first picture you can find on like image search for it, he just looks like James Bond in his tux and...
Oh, yeah. He does, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's kind of the vibe I think they were going for with it. But there's some interesting pictures of Sam Neill in the role, and like various suave suits, and like it looks like some military disguises and things. And it being a mini-series, I think they took a bit of time with it rather than condense it into a movie. So I'm definitely going to try and track it down. Probably be on YouTube or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting story. Thank you so much.
No, I'm glad you found it interesting. Yeah, I think there's a book about him as well, there's a few books.
Yeah, it's interesting whether he did embellish everything or, yeah, and what his I struggled to work out what his motivations were.
Yeah.
Was he doing it for the money? Was he doing it for the glory?
It seems like at some stages he was clearly out to make money.
But then why did he go, if that was actually, then he decided to go back to try and rescue his friends. I mean, that seemed incredibly out of character.
Yeah, that's the point where when he's barely gotten out alive after their failed coup, and the government are like, you got to go back. You think most people, especially someone who's just out to serve themselves, would be like, no, that's it, I'm done.
Well, unless he had sort of like, one of these, megalomania or something where he really did feel like he could get away with it all.
Yeah, could be. He'd gotten away with so much before, even to the point where they're like, this is your safest way out of Russia. It's like, no, I'm just going to go the most direct way. And then he walked out fine. It's like he's proven time and time again that he can do the impossible, so why can't you keep doing that? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What's that quote? You have to get lucky every time, only you have to get lucky once.
I just want to know what his real origin story is.
Yeah.
Because that might hold some answers as well. Because if he is from Russia, and then depending on who his family was and his background, it might, have some more reasons why he keeps going back to Russia. Maybe there's something deeper there.
Yeah, I mean, he obviously doesn't have any loyalty to them, considering he was trying to overthrow the government and stuff, and he was actively working against Russia. It's a mystery. He is an international man of mystery.
Yeah, the Ace of Spies. Not a bad nickname.
Yeah, really good, in fact.
Well, if people enjoyed this and want to find you online or listen to more of your stuff, where can they do that?
Basically, still just Facebook. Other things that are possibly happening are still in the possibly stage, not the actual stage.
Nice. At least it's still in the possibly stage and not in the nah stage.
That's true.
Always be positive.
Indeed.
Cool. Well, listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, you can find us on social media. We have a Twitter and Instagram account, which is at eccentric_earth. And our Facebook is www.facebook.com/eccentricearth. If you want to write in with any suggestions for episodes, or to give us any feedback, or to get in contact with us for any reason, our email address is eccentricearth@outlook.com. We're on all major podcast providers and YouTube, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you enjoy the show, please leave us a review, because it really does help us find new listeners. We're also now part of the Brit Pod Scene Network, which has dozens of amazing British podcasts, so go and check them out to see if you can find another new show to listen to.
Congratulations on that, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Well, Han, thank you for coming on the show again.
Thank you for having me. That was a really interesting topic. And, yeah, not dark.
Yeah, some nasty stuff happened, but not too dark. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.